can join us there. All right, the record is going again, so that we're just starting our case share for today, and I'll go ahead and turn the time over to Kristen.
Hi, I'm kind of new to this position, so bear with me a little bit. We had a mom come in with a child the child is just about 7 and has trisomy 21 or Down syndrome. Mom resides in a shelter with her child. She also has an older child there, and they are not the child is not receiving any services. And they have not participated in any early intervention. So mom was most concerned about housing because her son, who is a handful, his behaviors are not ideal in the shelter setting, and we were trying to find some interventions for her to help with the housing, but also to help with her son. I downloaded a book from the Utah Down Syndrome Foundation, which was incredible. It actually walks a new parent through exactly the steps that they need to take. So we kind of had to dive into the middle of this, and I sat down with mom and we started going through some of the things that were available to her. But at this point, there were tears going down her face, and so I just kind of had to put everything aside. She's very overwhelmed, very in a very difficult situation, and it became apparent. I think what she was looking for was, she came in for a well check, but I think she was looking for more medical interventions, immediate medical interventions that would help her son and his behaviors. So I talked to her about what resources she had in her family just to see where she was. And she does have a sister who they lived with for a while, and the sister was able to set up appointments and to guide her to what needed to happen next. But the mom didn't like that. She didn't like being told what to do, and it became very adversarial. So that's how the mom ended up in the shelter, and she's been there for a year. So it became obvious what we needed to do was the doctor needed some labs, and so I found a lab place for her to go to. The problem is that she doesn't have a car, and she actually had taken an Uber here. And she also doesn't have a regular phone. She can only access kind of email when she has a Wi-Fi signal. So what I did was set up a contact with her through 211 so that she could talk to a counselor about housing. Found her the lab that she could go to, and then we set an appointment for her to come in 2 days later so that we could discuss the labs, and she was hopeful that she could get medication to help with her son. And then I also told her at that point, I had originally talked to her about the WSPD or DSPD waiver, the medically fragile waiver, and it just wasn't clicking at this moment because it was just too much information for her. So we took care of the more basic need, and then I contacted Utah Parent Center, who was wonderful. I spoke with Michelle Teement, and she sent me a list of resources for the mom. One thing, there are questions about autism in the child, and I don't know that autism was discussed during the initial visit with the doctor, but this is one thing that I talked about with Melissa. So it became apparent that, I mean, she could work with an intake worker to help with setting up the waivers. The problem was going to be respite for her son, so that the mom could actually get away for a moment. This is a mom that is overly tired from handling he's an adorable child, but very active. And so we put together a list of housing options, respite, medical care, other things that she might need. And then I put together a packet for her with the different waivers in it, some childcare services. I spoke with Dusty and we talked about doing the UDAC referral. The sad thing is the mom never showed up to the next doctor's appointment. And I've tried to reach her, but the phone, of course, doesn't work, and the email, it didn't work either. So the Utah Parent Center was incredible in helping to guide me through this situation, and that's so I wish I had better news at the end of this one, but that's where we are right now.
Thank you for sharing, Christy. I think that's a pretty common outcome, unfortunately, as medical home coordinators, is that we put a lot of time and effort to helping patients, and then sometimes they're lost to follow up.
They are. It's sad. I just feel bad that the mom was so overwhelmed with the whole thing, but yeah.
Are there any resources in particular that were either new to you or that you want to highlight with this group that you thought that would be really beneficial to share?
The resource that I really liked that the Utah Parent Center had come up with was providing respite care so that she could take the time to complete the medical information. That was a helpful experience for me to learn about.
That Utah Parent Center provides respite care while they're doing
just the paperwork and everything.
That's great. Thanks. Does anyone else have any comments on this particular case you want to jump in with? Jade put in the comments, that's so hard. Agreed. I think so.
And this is Lillian with the Utah Parent Center. And I just wanted to maybe clarify about what we do regarding respite. And I think excuse me, the paperwork that I can't remember her name. Our speaker talked about regarding respite is the paperwork for DSPD services. And I just wanted to know, yeah, we can provide that support and maybe giving a little bit of extra information. There is a wait list, so it's not an immediate, like a short-term solution. Although the good thing is that the main criteria to get higher place on that wait list is the level of needs of the child and also the family in general. So I like to clarify that for professionals who, so that you can give that type of information, not necessarily focusing on that part of the wait list. And yes, there's a long wait, but yeah, we can help them. I can talk by experience. My son also has Down syndrome and he was premature. I was told from that moment that I received the first visit from the Down Syndrome Association. They mentioned DSPD, but you are so overwhelmed at that time. And there were very difficult moments the first year. So I didn't actually do it until my son needed open heart surgery when he was around 8. Luckily, we're now receiving benefits, but yeah, that's what we can do for families, explain all the benefits. It goes beyond the respite. There's also caregiver compensation. And I just wanted to take the moment because I know this is probably the best benefit that we have in the States. And once we go through that wait list, it is really worth it. And it goes also or services for adults. So if there's no like other waivers within the state that they are available until they become adults at age 18, but this one doesn't have an age restriction. Thank you. If you have questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Lillian, for sharing that and adding to what Christy said. All right, does anybody else have any cases you want to bring to the group today? Other resources or announcements that you'd like to share? Updates, ideas? We love to have this time for you all to really make this meeting valuable to you. So if you have anything, you can go ahead and unmute yourself or put it in the chat.
This is Ingrid from Wasatch Pediatrics in Park City. I was listening to Lillian. Thank you so much. I have a mother of baby who is trisomy 21, and she is having a hard time accepting the diagnosis. So she was told during her pregnancy that her baby was was going to be born with trisomy 21, and it seems like, I don't know if some other providers were asking her if she wanted to terminate the pregnancy, and she didn't do that. She had the baby, but now she's saying that she has a hard time accepting the baby the way he is, and she has been connected with a therapist. She has been offered medication as well. She's not taking the medication. She's just starting her therapy, and she has been connected with the Utah Down Syndrome Association, with other moms, a couple of moms in the community as well that have talked to her, but she's just having a hard time, and I'm wondering if there is any parent groups or any peer support for her. She speaks Spanish too, so that's my question.
I think, well, I want to bring up like the model that we use at the Utah Parent Center is parents helping parents. And I understand how this mom feels, and it's that period of adjustment or acceptance and then excitement for the baby. It varies, from parent to parent. And I'd be happy to connect with this family if you want to refer them, or if you have authorization to share their information, then maybe you can send an email or call us. I don't know if an individual message in the chat to keep the privacy. I can type my email also, so you can forward that information. And the Utah Down Syndrome Association is, I think, the one program that has different support groups and in different areas. Some are just like social, but I think that could help to see other parents, and we are very open to share our experiences, especially when we are within these meetings. And I can see, once I talk to her one-on-one, like what other services or support in the community we can find for her.
Thank you. That will be great if you could pass on your information, and I can email you about her. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And Haley Hernandez put this resource in the chat as well. Is that displaying for everybody? consciente de tu
Yes.
parents for
And
children?
I'm putting the executive director's email in there as well, if anybody would like to reach out to Carolina.
So it's Parents for Children is the organization, but it's therapy in Spanish that might be good for this particular case. Elma, or sorry, Carrie, not Elma.
Sorry, I'm sorry to confuse everyone. I just want to mention, I mean, this Parents for Children does things virtually, so this is not something that only can be accessed in the Salt Lake Valley. And they're very, like Carolina is very approachable. Like you can reach out to her and ask her a question and she can like help a parent sign up for a specific course or a counselor that they think is the best option for them. So I just wanted to add that. This is a great resource.
Thanks. Okay, great. We'll be sure and get all of this again linked in the notes as well. Does anybody else have another case or resource you want to bring up during this time? All right, we'll go ahead and move into our learning session for today then, which is again on this kind of our focus on education and educational resources, understanding IEPs in section 504. So we have Michelle Creek today from the Utah Parent Center, who is the statewide education projects coordinator with us. And I'm going to go ahead and turn over the time to her.
Hey, thank you, Athena. Am I sharing the right screen?
You're not sharing anything just yet.
Well, I guess that wouldn't be it. Let's try that again then. I have it all queued up, but I can never really tell what everyone else is seeing. Oh. Start from the beginning here. Are you seeing anything at all yet?
No, your screen.
Not yet.
It's not broadcasting yet.
Okay.
I have to go to the share screen button at the bottom and reselect it.
Reselect it. Okay. Yeah, I was afraid if I did that too early, that might be an issue. Let's see here. All righty.
There we go. Now it's
Okay, it's up now.
what is, let's see.
Okay, let me see. All right, are you seeing just the slides or do you have the film strip and the speaker's notes as well?
We are seeing the film strip and to the side, but
Let's see. Does that make a difference?
yeah, I think that's the view you want.
Okay, all right, we got it then. Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me today to share some information with you about IEPs, 504 plans, other ways that the struggling student can be helped in school. And hopefully this serves as a refresher course for those of you who might already know something about this. Might be an introduction if you don't know much about it, you're new to the topic. And I hope to also highlight some of the ways that you as professionals and third-party providers, maybe outside of the public school system, can really help the educational experience of the children that you serve. So with that, my name is Michelle Creek. As Athena said, I do work at the Utah Parent Center as a parent consultant. Lilium does as well. Lilium works in our community and health resources side. I work in the education side, and we also have other projects and grants there too. We've got a lot of resources to help families of children with disabilities, and not just families. Although we're called the Utah Parent Center, we also are happy to talk to professionals such as yourself, really anyone who calls, caregivers, anyone who is seeking information or support for children with disabilities. As a requirement, all of the parent consultants here at the Utah Parent Center are parents of children with disabilities themselves. So that helps us when we talk to caregivers, parents, professionals. We get it because we've had similar experiences ourselves with our own children. And it's a great place to work, and we love to help the people who call. So please, if you have any questions at all around children with disabilities and resources available, please give us a call. We provide one-on-one consultations that are private to anyone, and also trainings and workshops such as these. We attend events out in the community. So we really do a lot of different things to support the community of children with disabilities. Today, we're going to be focusing mainly on 3 areas. We're going to be talking about a collaborative mindset. Briefly, we're going to be looking at 3 different options for helping children with disabilities in an educational setting. And then we're also going to talk real briefly again about some of the ways that we can help you. So a collaborative mindset. I don't know what you think of when you think of collaboration. It actually comes from 2 Latin words meaning to work together, right? Labor, co. So working together is something that we like to encourage. To be honest, a lot of times when parents call us, they're very frustrated. They've tried some things on their own, maybe not been super successful, and they will sometimes call us with the idea that we are going to ride to the rescue, and we're going to come in and wave a magic wand, or maybe a sword in some instances, and just put everything right. And that's not what we do. We try very hard to encourage collaboration amongst the team of people that are supporting the child, the student, because we know that the outcome is going to be better that way. Sometimes we'll go into a school setting and the people at the school assume that because we're there supporting the parent, that again, we are in an adversarial position with the schools, and that's not the case either. Our real interest is to get everybody working together to support the child in the way that they need. So educational collaboration is a process that involves educators, parents, and other professionals such as yourself working together to support the students. And the goal is, of course, that the focus is on the needs of the student. And sometimes, again, oh, are you seeing a blank? That's interesting.
Nope, we're seeing.
Okay, good. I have 2 screens and my second screen just went blank. So, okay, well, we will just soldier on here. Again, it's going to be better for the student if everyone is working together. There's a lot of power in people coming together with their different perspectives and expertise, and the focus should be on the needs of the child. And if everyone on the team can keep that in mind, that that's where the real focus is, then it's going to be a better outcome for the child. So as professionals, there are some options for ways that you can collaborate. You can bring specialized insights that really can enrich the educational experience for the students that have a variety of learning challenges. And often, as we heard Christy talk about in case sharing, parents are overwhelmed They're simply overwhelmed. Education is just one small piece of everything that they need to do for their child. And so they're really looking for all the support they can get. And that's something that you are positioned well to help provide. But you may not be aware that you can play a role in the child's educational experience. So it'll be very important to you to be able to communicate with the parent that you're willing to collaborate with the educational team. Sometimes you can even contact the school, say, or a teacher, or maybe a counselor directly if the parent gives you permission. Many schools provide forms for what they call two-way communication, where if the parent gives you permission, then you are able to communicate directly with the school. So perhaps the teacher or the nurse or the school psychologist would have some questions about what might be best for the student. And they can communicate directly with you, again, if the parent gives you permission. So that's a very powerful way that you can have input. You can also actually be a part of the school meetings. You can attend virtually. You can attend in person. You can send letters if you want to have input there. And that can also be a very powerful resource. I have been in many school meetings, many IEP meetings where the team overall was not convinced that a student might need a particular intervention, but with the input from a medical professional or a healthcare professional, a mental health professional, they then realized that yes, this was a need for the child. And how can we fill that need? How can we support the child? So professional input can make a big difference at times. Community access and resources, like you have all been talking about here. Again, parents are often so busy just caring for their child that they're unaware of all the support that is available out there. And I would just say, while it is common for some of these overwhelmed parents to kind of drop off the radar for a bit, quite often, they pop back on a little while later, and then maybe they are at a point when they can utilize some of the information and the resources that you've shared with them. So that kind of information can also be extremely important to the parents and really to anybody who helps care for the child. Okay, there we go. So the power of collaboration. The advantages of collaborating with external professionals extend beyond the classroom. When students receive comprehensive and individualized support, their self-esteem and confidence can improve. Additionally, parents and caregivers, such as people in the educational system, also benefit from your expert guidance. So it really is something very valuable that you can add when you collaborate with educational teams on behalf of a child. So let's now focus on 3 ways that schools can specifically support students with disabilities. We'll talk about an MTSS, 504 plans, and IEP plans. MTSS used to be called RTI, and I know you probably have a lot of acronyms in your field. We certainly do in education. MTSS stands for a multi-tiered system of supports. And basically, if you picture a pyramid, there are interventions and supports at the base that are really universal, that benefit everyone in the classroom. Good classroom management practices that, again, should benefit every child in the class. But then as you move up the pyramid, if there are children that need additional support, then you can start looking at some supports that are a little more individualized, maybe a little more intensive. Maybe the child needs more one-on-one instruction. Maybe they need to be working in small groups. Maybe they need some additional instruction around a certain subject. And then as you get to the very top of the pyramid, then of course, these are the children that are needing the most intensive and the most individualized interventions and supports. And often these children will have a 504 plan or an IEP plan to help with that. So that's simply what MTSS means. These are practices that can be put into place in the classroom to help support children. The presumption with children with disabilities is that the more they can be educated in the classroom with their peers, the better for them, and actually the better for their peers. Inclusive education really does benefit everyone. This is what all the current research is showing. Of course, it's not always possible, depending on the child's needs, depending on the disability, that they spend all day in the general education classroom, but the presumption and actually the law is that they are in the general education classroom to the greatest extent possible, and that they receive supports and services there. They do much better, their peers do much better if it's an inclusive environment. MTSS supports can be implemented then largely in the classroom until you get, to that very upper tier, where sometimes then the student needs to be pulled out and receive special instruction, maybe in a resource class or something like that. MTSS supports can be considered when a student is struggling, but they don't qualify for an IEP. And we'll talk about those eligibility qualifications in just a little bit. They can basically do grade level work, but they're falling behind, and for a variety of reasons, right? A student might have had an extended period of absence with health issues, and we see this a lot in the disability community, that although they may be able to do grade level work, they may have medical issues that take them out of the classroom for extended periods of time. And so they may need extra support because of that. A student might just need a higher level of behavior support. And this is something that is very common, that the child might be able to do grade level work. Academics may not necessarily be a problem, but it's the behavior. Their social emotional skills are interfering with their ability to learn. And those are types of supports that can be delivered at school too, to help the child access their education to the greatest extent possible. Or students might need counseling services at school. That can also be provided at school through a school counselor or maybe a school psychiatrist. And those are things that can be done without a 504, without an IEP. The USBE, the Utah State Board of Education website, has additional resources about multi-tiered systems of supports, and they even have models for interventions around specific topics like math, like behavior. So this QR code can help you access some of those resources, or simply by going to the USBE website and searching under MTSS or behavior. There's also one specifically for social, emotional, and behavioral challenges. There's a great website that I access a lot in talking to parents, and that is PBISworld.com. It stands for Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. And one thing that I like about this particular website is that it's categorized by behavioral challenge. So let's say a child elopes a lot, they leave a lot. You can choose that as a challenge, and then it will actually give you tier 1 interventions. Then if those have been implemented for several weeks and there hasn't really been progress, you can choose tier 2 interventions, and it goes all the way up to tier 3 interventions for specific behavioral challenges. Lots of suggestions and ideas for evidence-based interventions and supports. And that's very helpful because often parents will be getting calls from the school, you know, come pick up your child, and they're just, again, they're overwhelmed. They're trying to juggle work, other children, you know, medical concerns, and they're always having to come to school and pick up their child for behavior, but nobody seems to have any suggestions for what could be tried to improve the situation. And so if you are armed with some resources, some suggestions, some ideas for the parent, then that can really help them quite a bit. Because again, quite often the parent is in, if not traumatized, certainly survival mode. And I speak from personal experience there. And at that point, the idea generation just kind of shuts down. So that can be an important role that you play in helping caregivers. So let's ask ourselves a question here, because this is one that we often hear at the Utah Parent Center, that if a child is receiving some level of MTSS supports in the classroom, then they can't be evaluated for special education services until the MTSS supports have failed. Do you think that's true or false? It's actually false. So MTSS supports can be implemented at any time for any student with or without a formal evaluation. However, if a disability is suspected, then the child should be evaluated for special education. You shouldn't wait for the child to fail until they're evaluated. That evaluation can happen at any point while they're receiving those MTSS supports in the classroom. So it's not either or. They can be happening concurrently. The child can be receiving supports in the classroom, but also be evaluated for special education, which we will talk about again in just a few minutes. So now let's talk about Section 504 plans. Section 504 refers to the section of the Vocational Rehabilitation Act of, I believe it was 1978. Anyway, it's been around a while, and it is meant to prevent discrimination against individuals with disabilities in any area that receives public funding. And its focus is equal access and opportunity for people with disabilities. It doesn't address education specifically as the IDEA does, but education is included in Section 504 because it is often an area that receives public funding. So public schools, charter schools, any organization that receives federal funding then has a requirement not to discriminate against people with disabilities. So when you hear 504 plan, that's because that is actually the law that is governing the educational plan that the student then might be using to access their education. If you look at our illustrations here, I think this gives a really good visual description of the intention, the purpose of section 504. In the first illustration, you can see that there are children of different heights behind a fence trying to participate as spectators at a baseball game. And of course, only one of those children really has an unimpeded view. If you look at the middle picture, you'll see now that supports have been added, right? Tiered supports, actually, so that all three children are able to access a view of the game. But if you look at the last picture, that's also another way that equal opportunity and access can be provided, and that is by removing barriers. So 504 plans can provide equal access in two different ways, and that is either by adding in supports that allow the child to access education equally with their non-disabled peers, or by removing barriers that are standing in the way, that are preventing that child from accessing an equal education. So another one of our, now my mouse isn't working. Okay, my finger works, that's good. Another one of our acronyms is FAPE, and it stands for Free Appropriate Public Education. And that is a guaranteed right for children with disabilities under section 504 and also under the IDEA, which governs IEP plans. So all children are entitled to a free, appropriate public education. And that means at no cost to parents, no extra fees should be involved, that there are appropriate supports to allow the child to access their education the same as their non-disabled peers. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that their achievement is going to be at the same level, but they have that equal access. There aren't barriers standing between them and the ability to access an education that's appropriate for them. Now, sometimes we get calls from parents or caregivers that wonder about private schools. It depends on the private school. A lot of private schools don't receive federal funding, and so technically they are not required to provide FAPE. Many do, but technically they are not required to. There is a scholarship, there are actually two, I believe, in Utah, that some disabled children can apply for. And if they use that scholarship to pay for their tuition at a private school, then now federal funding is involved. And so that changes the picture a little bit. But for the most part, public school, charter schools receive that funding that require them to provide FAPE. Private schools may not always. So when should a student be evaluated for eligibility for a Section 504 plan? Well, if there have been some supports put in place in the classroom, but the child is still struggling, he or she is not progressing, or perhaps even regressing, then again, that's a sign that an evaluation for either a 504 plan or an IEP plan should be considered. Again, you don't have to wait until the struggle occurs. If a disability is suspected, then the evaluation should happen while they're receiving those MTSS supports. If they've already been identified by a healthcare professional or a mental health professional as having a disability, okay, then you know. Now, a school is not obligated to take outside evaluations and then say, okay, then the child is eligible. But most schools will consider that. It usually, if there's a professional diagnosis that's available, then that's a very strong indicator to the schools then that they do need to be evaluated. And then the schools will often do their own evaluations. There are some common ones out there, but each district really can decide which evaluations they want to use in evaluating children. But again, a professional diagnosis will be taken seriously by most schools. If the school suspects the student might have a disability but has not been identified, doesn't have a diagnosis, then they might be referred to be evaluated for special education services. Most schools will not provide medical diagnoses like for autism or something like that. The types of evaluations that schools tend to do are related to educational performance and social behavioral skills. But, you know, sometimes parents will say, well, I think my child might be on the spectrum, but the school won't administer the ADOS. No, but they will administer other types of evaluations, such as social evaluations, maybe evaluations for reading or writing, you know, comprehension, calculation, those kinds of things, because those relate to the child's educational experience. And usually the school will say, you need to go to a medical professional to get a medical diagnosis. That's just not something that they will provide. But if the child already has a medical diagnosis, then that's often very helpful for the school so that they know where to evaluate the child, specifically what areas. Oops. So section 504, eligibility, this is the statement that is used to determine eligibility. An individual with a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. So what's important, you know, to notice there is that it doesn't have to be numerous things, numerous impairments, just one. And it only has to substantially limit a major life activity. What's a major life activity, you ask? Under 504, and this is not an exhaustive list, but this is an example of what might be considered a major life activity: caring for yourself, performing manual tasks, seeing, hearing, eating, sleeping, walking, standing, lifting, bending, speaking, breathing, learning. So that's a very broad category. Learning, reading, concentrating, thinking, communicating, working. So it's purposefully so. It's broad eligibility for a 504. It's not difficult to qualify for a 504 plan if a child has an impairment in any major life activity. Whoops, well, my clicker's click happy. So the process for receiving a section 504 plan, it's a little more informal than for an IEP plan. A variety of sources of information can be considered: parent observations, doctor's notes or diagnoses, test scores, classroom observations, attendance records, report cards, the number of times a child has been suspended, homework samples. They don't have to be formal evaluations, but the more data, the better for the team to consider. And, you know, once that data has been gathered indicating that there are some problems here, then a meeting is called of a 504 team. Technically, a school can actually institute a 504 plan without even involving the parent. Best practice is, of course, that the parent is involved. And quite often it is the parent that is seeking that type of intervention, so they will be involved from the start. But sometimes I get calls from parents who will say, my child has a 504 plan and I don't know anything about it. The school put it into place. I don't know what it is. I would like a copy. I'd like to know what's going on. I don't know if it's been successful. So again, best practice is that the parent is involved and that then together a decision will be made. Yes, this child could benefit from some additional supports. Let's put a 504 plan in place. And these are the supports that we think might be helpful for the child. And then some observations are made, right? More data is gathered. Are these supports working? And again, hopefully the parent is involved in that process and the team continues to meet and revise the plan until the child is progressing. Accommodations and services on the 504 plan can also be quite broad. They can include things like speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, sensory processing supports. It might just be preferential seating or extra time to complete assignments. So there are different types of accommodations that can be put in place on a 504 plan. They might be environmental. They might be organizational. So maybe a child needs a special kind of binder or a check-in, check-out system with the teacher to help them keep track of their assignments. Maybe they need to sit environmental in a particular place in the classroom so they're less distracted, or it's easier for them to see the teacher or see the board. Behavioral accommodations, maybe that child needs breaks. Maybe they need the opportunity to get up and move about more freely. Presentation, how is the material being presented to the child? Does the material need to be presented in a different manner for them to be able to access it? Methodology, again, how are things going to be taught? Maybe the assignments need to be broken down into smaller steps. Maybe the child needs to go at a slower pace. Curriculum, that kind of thing. The 504 plan assumes that the child will basically be in the general education classroom most of the time. They'll be receiving most of their instruction in the general education environment, and that for the most part, they can keep up with that general education curriculum in the classroom with appropriate accommodations and supports. So they are not modifying the curriculum. They're not changing the curriculum in terms of expectations of what the child will learn, but mostly how they will learn it. So this is something else that we hear frequently from parents, is that they suspect their child is struggling. Homework is just torture. They've noticed from the assignments that their child brings home or in talking to their child that the child doesn't seem to be learning or progressing or understanding what they're being taught. And the parent will perhaps approach the teacher about, what can be done? Could there be a 504 plan? Could there be, some testing? And they'll hear, no, their grades are fine. Their grades are fine. There's no need for that. And so I probably gave it away, but of course that does not automatically disqualify a child from needing supports in other areas. Their grades might be adequate, but grades are only one part of a child's educational experience. And so there may be social concerns, there may be behavioral concerns. The child's educational experience also includes things like recess and extracurricular activities. And so children can have struggles in a number of areas, and grades are not the only indicator of whether they need additional support. And that's important for parents to know, and they don't always understand that. Okay, so here's a case study. The student was diagnosed as having a bipolar disorder, but the severity, meaning the frequency, the intensity, the duration of the episodes of behavior they weren't severe enough to qualify a student under IDEA, which is again the IEP plan that we're going to talk about next. So the school convened a 504 committee, and they determined, the 504 committee, that the student's condition, their disorder, did actually impair a major life activity of learning. And so they were going to develop a 504 plan for the student. Okay, so what kinds of accommodations could be on a 504 plan for this particular student? Maybe the assignments need to be broken down into more manageable parts. Maybe directions need to be more clear, more simple, given one step at a time. I know for my daughters, step by step is huge. If I or anybody were to try and give them do this, this, and this, that's too much. One step at a time was important for them to be able to succeed at things. Maybe help the student prepare ahead of time for transitions. Maybe it's a timer, maybe it's just a verbal reminder. Okay, we have, 5 more minutes that we're going to be working on this activity, and then we'll be moving to the next activity. Maybe a little more close monitoring might be important. Are you still seeing the full slide?
Yes.
Okay, good, because my screen flipped out of slide share. So as long as you can see the slide, then that's good. So they might need more breaks. They might need shorter times for actually focusing on work and then being able to choose an alternate activity. Lots of things like that can be done under a 504 plan. Let me see if I can get that back for myself. Okay, there we go. Maybe the staff needs to be alerted. The teacher that spends the most time with the student might be aware of this, but if a student maybe goes to an art class or another elective and is only there a couple of times a week for an hour or so, perhaps that teacher needs to be alerted as well as to accommodations for the student. Maybe they need more positive praise than the average student would in order to keep that motivation up. They might need some sessions with the school counselor on a regular basis. And if there are times when perhaps the mood disorder makes it impossible for the student to attend school, then perhaps there are supports put in place for them to receive instruction at home. So that might be another possibility that could be written into a 504 plan. Very flexible. 504 plans are extremely flexible. And again, the eligibility requirements are not as formal as they are for IEP plans, which is what we will talk about next. Technically, when you say special education, that means education that is provided under the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and that is provided under an IEP plan, an individual educational plan. And to qualify for an IEP plan, there are different requirements than for a 504 plan. However, FAPE is still guaranteed. That free, appropriate public education is still a guarantee for children with disabilities under IDEA. So special education is a little bit different from a 504 education in that it's specially designed instruction to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability. And that includes instruction in the classroom, the home. If they're in a hospital for an extended stay or an institution, they still have a right to FAPE. It also includes instruction in physical education, in PE. There's a process to qualify for an IEP plan. It starts with a referral. And this can be by a parent, a teacher, somebody, but the parent has to request the evaluation and they have to sign a consent for their child to be evaluated. And that's important. If the parent just talks to a teacher and says, I'm a little worried about, my child, I think they need some additional help. I'd like them to be tested, but they never sign a formal consent form, or the teacher never passes that request on, then the child likely will not be evaluated. The schools are not actually allowed to evaluate a child for special education without a parent's written consent. But if a parent does make that request, then the parent should also say, and I will sign the consent form right now, so those evaluations can go forward. Once that happens, there's a 45-day school day time limit for those evaluations to be completed and the results shared with the parent. And then an eligibility meeting is held where the test results, the evaluation results are shared, the data is examined, and the IEP team then decides, is this child eligible for special education and an IEP plan? If so, then the IEP team meets and drafts a plan, and their placement is decided, meaning will the child spend their time in the general education classroom? Will the child be in resource classes, or will there be some combination of the two? And with an IEP plan, there's a requirement that it is reviewed annually to see if the goals need to be revised. So for IEP plans and special education, there are actually 13 qualifying categories: autism, deafblindness, deafness, and so on. Many of our children qualify under other health impairment because that will cover things such as ADHD. It might cover things such as anxiety, depression, those kinds of things that will impact their learning. So sometimes, parents think, oh, my child does have a diagnosis of autism, they qualify. Well, that's one of the features of eligibility, but it's not automatic because there are actually three, we call them the 3 prongs of eligibility that will determine whether a child is eligible for special education. The first one is, does the student have an IDEA disability? That, is listed right there amongst the 13. Does that disability adversely affect their educational performance? So a child might have one of those disabilities, but it's not really impacting their educational performance. They're still able to access their education equally with their non-disabled peers. And the third prong is, does the child require special education and related services. And by special education, that means that the curriculum is modified to be unique to that child. There's no longer the expectation that that student is going to be able to complete the grade level curriculum just like a child without disabilities. Now the assumption is they will need their own uniquely modified curriculum in order to progress educationally. So if all three of those requirements are met, then a child is eligible for special education. And as we've discussed, special education is not just accommodations like we talked about with 504 plans, which means how the material is delivered or how the learning might be assessed. It's also modifications to what the child is learning, what is being taught. And so that is why there is a higher threshold of eligibility for special education, because it does then assume that the child will need their own individualized educational plan and modifications to the curriculum. An IEP team is actually specified in the IDEA law. It needs to include the parent by law. Once students are old enough to contribute to an IEP meeting, then they can be invited as well. And I've been in IEP meetings where children, quite young, 9 or 10, have been involved and able to say, this is what helps me. This is what I need. This is difficult for me. And that's a decision that the parent and the student can make, whether they can contribute meaningfully to the IEP meeting. There needs to be a special education teacher involved. There needs to be a general education teacher involved if the child has any of their instruction happening in the general education classroom. LEA representative. LEA means the local education agency. And what that typically means is the school or perhaps someone from the school district. So it might be the principal, it might be the vice principal, it might be the district special education director, it might be the charter school director, but someone from that educational agency that has authority to say, yes, we will provide these services and these supports for the child. And then related service provider. And this is perhaps where many of you might be involved. If a parent invites you to attend a meeting and you have something meaningful to contribute about the child's education, then you are allowed to come to the meeting. Again, I have been in meetings where there have been psychiatrists, where there have been ABA therapists, where there have been nurses involved because they had critical information that they could add for the IEP team to consider when they were drafting the child's educational plan. And usually that's very helpful for an IEP team who will have experience and expertise in educational areas, but not in all areas pertaining to the child. So there's a huge role that you can play. William Lane, who is a special education consultant, said, if you are an outside provider of services to the student, it's helpful to know that your information is not a prescription for supports and services, but your data and information will be very helpful to the team and can be considered when looking at eligibility and then at the educational plan. So again, doctors nurses, medical professionals are not allowed to prescribe what is going to happen to the child at school. Unless, of course, there's a health plan and we're talking medications and feeding tubes and things like that. That's a separate issue. But as far as their educational plan goes, your input can be invaluable. And I have seen IEP teams completely reconsider whether aids are provided or a child's placement based on the input from an outside provider. So it can be extremely helpful, the input that you give. It can be a letter. It can be virtual attendance. You can participate in a number of ways. Or, again, that two-way communication we talked about before, where you're communicating directly with the school. You don't have to be in a meeting. Or if you provide other types of supports to the child outside of the school setting, but they need to be continued in the school setting. That's important information that you can share as well. We have a wonderful IEP resource. It's a handbook all about the IEP process that walks parents through the IEP process from beginning to end. And we are in the process of revising and reprinting it, so we don't have hard copies at the moment, but it is available online at upc.org. And you'll just use the resources tab to search for IEPs, and it will come up. This is a case study involving a 10-year-old child with severe autism, a lot of behavioral challenges, short attention span, elopement, running away. These are all types of things that can be a problem with children who have disabilities. What could be done with an IEP plan to help in a situation like that? Well, they might want to do some additional evaluations for assistive technology or augmentative communication devices. They might want to do a functional behavioral assessment to try and determine, are there triggers for the meltdowns and the elopements, and how do we avoid those? They might want to do a sensory evaluation to see if there are sensory processing issues going on. There might be OT, PT, LSP evaluations that are needed, and those supports added. They need to take into account any professional diagnoses or therapies that the child has that may need to be incorporated into her educational plan. And the curriculum, again, can be modified to make it more manageable for this particular child. Based on these additional evaluations, in this case, the IEP team did determine that the child suffered from communication challenges, and her frustration with that was a huge trigger for the meltdowns. She also had sensory processing disorders. So there were supports added there, like, the FM headphones and those kinds of things that screened out a lot of the background noise and helped her to be able to hear her teacher more easily. Movement breaks, weighted items, things like that helped again. It was determined she needed more supervision during those maybe more loosely structured times, like recess or lunch or transition between classes, so that the elopement wouldn't be such a concern. Those were all things that could be put into the IEP plan to help this student based on the data that was gathered from the evaluations that were made. One last true false. I think it's our last one, pretty sure. If a parent is told that their child was just evaluated last year and found not eligible, they can't be evaluated again for 3 years. I don't know if any of you have ever heard the 3-year. We have parents calling and saying that they have been told that, or at least that's what they understood. Well, that is false. The IEP handbook says that if your student was evaluated, then they need to be reevaluated at least every 3 years, and a review of the data to determine what types of supports, accommodations, modifications might be necessary. So 3 years is actually real, but what the law says is that you can't go longer than 3 years without reevaluating a student for their IEP. However, if your child was evaluated last year and maybe qualified for a few services, but the parent is concerned that there are more struggles, more challenges that need to be addressed, they can request another evaluation again the next year for different things, or even for the same thing. Now, as you probably know, in order for some tests to be valid, there is usually a waiting period for retesting in between, but you don't have to wait 3 years. And if a child has been evaluated and determined not to be eligible 1 year, then they can be reevaluated the next year. You don't have to wait 3 years. Finally, as part of the IDEA law, there is a process laid out for parents to try and resolve problems and disagreements, because there are disagreements sometimes that just can't be resolved, it seems, between the IEP team. But there is a dispute resolution process then as part of the safeguards that students and parents have in the special education process. So if, you've had those IEP team meetings, or the parent has, and they've just had an impasse, the parent doesn't agree with decisions that have been made, what can they do? Well, we always encourage the parent to start locally first with the teacher, see what can be done in the classroom. The teacher is the one who's going to be most connected, and the response is going to be most immediate there at the teacher level. If that's not working, then elevate it to the school level. Maybe the parent needs to speak with the principal and see if something can be changed there. That doesn't work, then there's the district level. Or if it's a charter school, there's usually a charter school board, and elevate it again. So the parent can continue to elevate their concerns up what we call the chain of command. But we do encourage, besides that collaboration, we encourage them to start locally, even when they're frustrated, because the response will be more immediate. And finally, there is a state complaint that's available. There are also due process legal actions that can be taken. There's mediation. There's facilitation that's provided free of charge by the Utah State Board of Education. So they do have a number of options, even beyond the district level. These are part of the procedural safeguards that are provided to students and parents under the IDEA. Parents have a right to access their child's educational records. They have to give consent before their child is evaluated. There needs to be confidentiality of their child's information. If their child is being disciplined, say suspended, secluded, something like that, they have the safeguard that can't happen without the child's disability being taken into account, and a special hearing held to determine, is this behavior problem due to the child's disability? And if so, how is that going to be supported, addressed? what kind of intervention is going to happen, not just suspension. Dispute resolution, again, that's the name of the process that the parents can follow in order to address their concerns. And at the Utah Parent Center, we're here to help. We have educational consultants that can provide those one-on-one consultations to parents and professionals. We get a lot of calls from professionals just having questions about, their patients, their clients, and what can be done, what resources might exist that they can use then to help. And then this is a very handy little tip sheet that you are free to download, print, pass out. It's called When to Call the Utah Parent Center. And it gives some specific instances, examples of ways that we might be able to help. And we are here to do that. So we don't have a lot of time for questions, but we do have some. If anybody would like to ask a question, please unmute yourself.
And Michelle, while you do that, we have an evaluation that we like our participants to fill out. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that for people to start filling out, since we do.
Okay, great.
We're going to run right up to the hour here, it looks like.
We do the same.
So.
So,
Leaving that open so people can fill that out. But yes, thank you so much for your time today. I'll just do a few closing meeting reminders, and then if people have additional questions, we can stay on. But our next meeting is the third Wednesday in August. It'll be August 21st. And kind of in this mindset of building on some of the education and back to school mindset, our next learning session is going to be all about bullying. And we have someone from the Utah State Office of Education lined up, as well as Michelle again, to kind of tag team on that presentation about bullying. So that'll be our August meeting. And then again, as always, please feel free to use the Facebook page or the listserv in between meetings. And yes, we'll take some questions if anybody has some questions still. Go through the chat here and see if anybody's posted anything there.
Hello.
Anybody have any? Yes, Ingrid, did you have a question?
Yes, I just wanted to see how we can get some guidance. We do have in our office a letter that sometimes we send to the schools, or sometimes we give them to the parents, basically saying this child has this diagnosis, and we are kind of in support, or we think that an IEP or a 504 would be beneficial. And I think some of this, well, a couple of the schools do not like that letter very much. So I was wondering if there's any support that we can maybe have to kind of go over our letter and make it more appropriate, I would say, or I don't know, more and better at communicating with the school.
sure. You could forward that letter to me. My email is michelle@utahparentcenter.org. In general, I would say the concerns of some schools around around those kinds of forms are that parents tend to think that it's like a prescription. And so, well, look, my doctor, my medical provider said that my child needs an IEP, so give me an IEP. And the school actually is duty bound to have data to show that a child really does need special education. They don't want to be putting a child into a special education plan unless the data supports that. And so they're going to want to do evaluations. And I think the problem is when the parents misunderstand that. They think they trust you, they trust their medical professional, they've seen the problems themselves. And they often don't understand that the school is required then to do their own evaluations, gather their own data, and then determine eligibility based on that. So I think just in general, trying to help the parent understand that this isn't like a prescription, it doesn't guarantee an IEP, but if you were to state very clearly that there are concerns, and these are the concerns, maybe milestones are being missed, maybe this diagnosis has been made, and frame it as concerns that you have, then that's very valuable information for the parent to take in when they are requesting evaluations for their child for special education. But if you want to send me the letter, I would be happy to look at that.
Yeah, that will be great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Ingrid.
We had another question in the chat. Haley asked if there's a time when a student may need an IEP and a 504 at the same time, or would that be redundant?
It usually is considered redundant because anything that's on a 504 plan can be put into an IEP plan. So I think there was just maybe one case that I have ever dealt with where in this particular district, they had separate funding pots for I think an aid for 504 that they didn't have under IEP in their special education. So the child had a 504 plan for an aid, but then had an IEP plan for everything else. But in general, if a child has a 504 plan and then they're evaluated and determined they do need more support, they do need an IEP, then everything that was in the 504 plan can be migrated into the IEP plan.
All right. Any other questions for Michelle?
If you think of any later, please call. We're always happy to talk to people with questions or even email. I know sometimes phone tag is kind of difficult. Many of us are part-time. I'm part-time, and so I'm not here every day. But there's always a consultant available every day. Or if email's easier, you can email info @utahparentcenter.org with questions that you might have, and then they will connect a consultant with you.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle, for joining us today.
You're welcome.
And we will look forward to seeing you again next month.
That's right. Okay. Take care, everyone. Stay cool.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.